At 7:15 a.m. on April 18, 1943, 16 P-38 Lightnings lifted off from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. The engines were loud. The twin booms shook a little as the wheels left the dirt. Inside the cockpits, the pilots checked their fuel. They had a long way to go. Most of them had never flown this far over open water before. The P-38 was different from other American fighters. It had two engines instead of one, two long tails that stuck out from the wings. The cockpit sat in the middle, between them. It looked strange. Some people said it looked like a mistake. When the first P-38s showed up in the Pacific, Japanese pilots saw them and didn't think much of them. A few even joked about the design. One commander called it the fork-tailed devil, but not because he was afraid. He thought it was awkward, clumsy, too big to turn fast, too heavy to climb quick. And for a while, it seemed like they were right. The early models had problems. The engines overheated in the tropical air. The turbochargers didn't always work. Pilots complained that it was hard to bail out of if something went wrong. In a dogfight, a Zero could turn tighter, it could spin faster, and when you're trying not to die, that matters. But the P-38 had something the Zero didn't: range. It could fly farther than almost any other fighter in the Pacific, and that changed everything. By early 1943, American intelligence had started picking up coded Japanese radio traffic. They were learning where enemy planes were going, when they were taking off, where they were landing. The codebreakers at Pearl Harbor and in Australia were getting better, and one day they picked up something big. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto was going to visit frontline troops in the Solomon Islands. The message included a full schedule, times, locations, even the type of plane he'd be flying in. Yamamoto wasn't just any officer. He had planned the attack on Pearl Harbor. He was the most important military leader Japan had. And now the Americans knew exactly where he was going to be. Someone had to stop him, but there was a problem. Yamamoto's route took him over the jungle, far from any American airfield. The only planes that could reach him were the ones that could fly over 400 miles, fight, and still make it home. That meant the P-38. On the morning of April 18th, the mission was called Operation Vengeance. 18 pilots were chosen. Most of them were young. A few had only been in combat a handful of times. They didn't know all the details yet. They just knew it was important. The lead pilot was Tom Lanphier. He was 24 years old. Quiet, focused. He'd flown P-38 since they first arrived in the theater. He knew the plane's weaknesses, but he also knew what it could do when it mattered. As the fighters climbed into the sky and turned north, the sun was still low. The ocean below them was flat and blue. There were no clouds, no ships, just water. They flew in radio silence. No one spoke. The only sounds were the engines and the wind against the canopy. They were heading toward Bougainville Island, toward a man who had started a war, and they had less than 2 hours to find him. The flight plan was exact. Every mile mattered. Every minute counted. The P-38s flew at wave-top level to stay off Japanese radar. Some of them were so low the pilots could see the spray from the water below. It was loud inside the cockpit. The twin engines shook the whole frame. The vibration went through the seat, through the stick, into their hands. They stayed in tight formation. No one broke off. No one turned back. Captain Tom Lanphier kept checking his watch. They had to hit the intercept point at exactly 9:35 a.m. Not earlier, not later. If they were too early, Yamamoto wouldn't be there yet. If they were late, he'd already be gone. Behind him, the other pilots followed in 2 groups. One group would go after the bombers, the other would hold off any escorts. It was simple, clean, but only if the timing was perfect. At 9:20 a.m., they started to climb. The island of Bougainville came into view. Green jungle, a thin strip of beach, smoke rising from a few small villages along the coast. The sky was clear, no enemy planes yet. Lanphier's radio crackled. One of the other pilots had spotted something. 2 Betty bombers, low, heading toward the coast. Lanphier turned and looked. He saw them. Twin-engine bombers, dark green, flying slow and steady about 5,000 feet up. Around them, 6 Zeros circled like guards. That was him. That was Yamamoto. Lanphier pushed the throttle forward. The P-38 jumped. The other planes followed. They climbed fast, engines screaming, trying to get above the bombers before the Zeros saw them. But the Zeros saw them. 3 of them peeled off and dove straight down toward the Americans. The rest stayed close to the bombers. The Japanese pilots didn't panic. They knew their job: protect the Admiral, keep the attackers away. Lanphier didn't have time to think. He broke left and rolled into the dive. His wingman, Rex Barber, went right. The two of them split up, trying to get around the escorts. One of the Zeros fired. Tracers cut through the air in bright streaks. Lanfear jerked the stick and pulled hard. The G-force pressed him into his seat. His vision went gray at the edges, but he kept going. Below him, the lead bomber turned. It was trying to get away, trying to reach the jungle where it might have a chance. Lanfear followed it down. He closed the distance fast. 500 yards, 400, 300. He could see the bomber clearly now. The tail gunner was firing back, little flashes of light from the rear turret. Bullets hit the P-38's wing but didn't stop it. At 200 yards, Lanfear opened fire. The 4.5 caliber guns and the 20mm cannon lit up. The noise was sharp and quick, like someone tearing metal. The rounds hit the bomber's right engine, then the wing, then the fuselage. Smoke poured out. The bomber started to roll. It dropped fast, spinning, pieces breaking off as it fell. Lanfear pulled up hard and banked away. He didn't see it hit the ground, but he felt the explosion behind him, a dull thump that shook the air. Rex Barber was still behind the second bomber. He fired. The Betty's tail section blew apart. The plane wobbled, then went down in a steep dive toward the water. Both bombers were gone. The whole fight had lasted less than 2 minutes. The Zeros were still there. They came around again, angry now, trying to get revenge. But the other P-38s had moved in. The sky became a mess of planes turning and firing and breaking away. One Zero got too close to Lanfear. He turned into it head on. For a second, they were flying straight at each other. Then the Zero flinched and rolled away. Lanfear didn't chase it. He was low on fuel. They all were. The fight was over. He called over the radio. Short, calm. That's a hit. Let's go home. The P-38s turned south and started the long flight back to Guadalcanal. Behind them, smoke rose from the jungle. The Zeros circled once, twice, then flew away. No one said much on the way back. They were tired. Their hands hurt from gripping the stick. Their ears rang from the engines and the gunfire. But they knew what they had done. By the time the P-38s landed back at Henderson Field, it was just afternoon. The pilots climbed out of their cockpits. Their flight suits were soaked with sweat. Some of them didn't say anything. They just sat down in the shade and drank water. No one knew for sure if Yamamoto had been on one of those bombers. Not yet. Intelligence officers came out to the airfield and talked to each pilot. They asked questions. What did you see? Which bomber went down first? Did anyone bail out? The pilots answered as best they could, but everything had happened fast. It was hard to remember details. Lanfear said he was sure he hit the lead bomber. Barber said he got the second one. A few of the other pilots weren't certain who shot what. In a dogfight, it's like that. Everything blurs together. But the bombers were down. That part was clear. Meanwhile, on Bougainville, Japanese search teams were moving through the jungle. They had seen the smoke. They knew something had crashed. They just didn't know what. It took them hours to reach the wreck. The jungle was thick, vines and mud. They had to cut their way through with machetes. When they finally got there, they found pieces of the bomber scattered across the trees. The fuselage had broken apart. One of the engines was buried in the dirt. And then they found him. Admiral Yamamoto was still in his seat. His white uniform was torn. His sword was still at his side. He had been killed instantly. 2 bullets had hit him, one in the jaw, one in the shoulder. He hadn't suffered. The Japanese soldiers stood there for a moment. No one moved. No one spoke. This was the man who had led their navy, the man who had struck the first blow of the war, and now he was gone. They wrapped his body carefully and carried it back through the jungle. It took the rest of the day. By evening, word had reached Tokyo. The government didn't announce it right away. They waited. They wanted to control how the news came out. For over a month, they said nothing. Yamamoto's death was kept secret. His staff was told not to talk. His family was told to stay quiet. But in the military, people knew, and slowly the story spread. Back in the United States, the pilots who flew the mission were told not to say anything either. The government didn't want Japan to know how Yamamoto had been found. If they knew the Americans had broken their codes, they would change them, and that would be the end of one of the biggest advantages the U.S. had. So the mission stayed classified. The pilots went back to flying. Some of them were sent to other assignments. Some kept fighting in the Pacific. A few didn't make it home. But the plane they flew that day, the one that had been laughed at, the one that looked too strange to work, it had done something no other fighter could. It had reached farther than anyone thought possible. It hit harder than anyone expected, and it had changed the course of the war. The P-38 wasn't a joke anymore. Japanese commanders stopped mocking it. They stopped underestimating it. In reports and debriefs, they started calling it by a different name, the Fork-tailed Devil. But this time, they meant it. Over the next 2 years, P-38s would shoot down more Japanese planes than almost any other American fighter. They would fly cover for bombers, they would strafe airfields, they would escort transport planes over the Himalayas, and they would rack up kill after kill, mission after mission in every corner of the Pacific. The pilots who flew them learned to trust the plane. It wasn't the fastest, it wasn't the most graceful, but it got them where they needed to go, and it brought them back. By the end of the war, the P-38 had become one of the most successful fighters in American history. It flew in every major theater, it served in every role, and it earned the respect of every pilot who sat in its cockpit. But it all started with one mission. One flight, one man in the jungle, and 16 planes that were built to go the distance.